Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. Bhutan, our neighbor in the northeast, a neighbor which is stuck between two giant powers, just like a lot of our other neighbors. Nepal, for example, India and China control the whole lot which happens within Bhutan. At least the Chinese are trying to. There's a lot which is happening in Bhutan between China and Bhutan that needs to be understood. There's a lot about the ground reality that needs to be understood. There's a lot about the history that needs to be understood. Recently, there was a controversy that was created by a statement that was given by the Bhutanese prime minister, uh, which brought Bhutan into the mainstream. After that, of course, the king of Bhutan came and met the prime minister Modi in India, and you know the story went forward. To discuss this, I have the honor of having with me Mr. Cloud Arpi, who's going to tell us the story of Bhutan and what is the Chinese trying to do in that region. Sir, firstly, thank you so much for once again coming on Dev Talks. It's always
Thank
an honor
you.
and pleasure talking
Thank
to you.
you. Thank you.
Sir, I'd leave this map. I mean, I'd leave the game open to you because Bhutan is an interesting country to India. We've always considered it to be a close partner, a friend. Uh, Today, we have a situation where that friend might be in trouble as well, and we might have to help it out. Plus, the friend might be going through a lot of pressure that we probably will not understand sitting in India. First of all, sir, what would you like to say to something like that? And over to you after that, sir.
If you could show that first map that showing that, because I feel sometimes that maps explain many things that better than words. That
Absolutely.
obviously Bhutan is stuck between India and uh, and China, and the relation for centuries have been with Tibet. It doesn't mean that the relation were always good, because the religious setup in Bhutan is different than from Tibet, and they belong to the Drukpa Kagyu school of Buddhism, not to the Gelug like the Dalai Lama. So there were frictions, but they were good neighbors at the same time, and decent neighbors. There was never a question of Tibet invaded part of Bhutan. So since 1910, India had a treaty relation with Bhutan, and now we are today the fifth king who recently came to Delhi. His four predecessors had very close relation with India. I went a few years ago, I think 2016, to Bhutan, and I had the occasion to meet some of the people in the think tank and some people working on the policy of Bhutan. And I was struck by something they say. They never spoke about China. They spoke always about our northern neighbor. During 2 hours in interaction with them, they always said our northern neighbor. They don't even want to pronounce, but it's a huge problem for them. And this map shows is interesting feature, which is a big worry for India. Uh, the media always speak about the Siliguri corridor or the chicken neck, because the eastern part, northeastern part of India, is linked to the rest of the country by a very small corridor, which is strategically very important, and which explain the India's election in June 2017, when the Doklam incident took place for 80 days or so. But there is something that we never mention also, is what I call in that map the Chumbi Corridor. Chumbi Corridor is the Chumbi Valley, Yatong, and which is stuck between Sikkim and in Bhutan, and it's like a finger in the. So this is also a great weakness for the Chinese. So when you think of the Chinese position, you have to think of the Chumbi corridor, while for India the main strategic worry is the Siliguri corridor or chicken neck. And that's very strange that geographically and historically that Chumbi corridor has remained part of Tibet, because it could have very well come to India at different point in time. For example, after the Youngest Band expedition in the
Hmm.
1904, and Sir Francis Youngest Band, then a young captain, had suggested that we in India keep that Chumbi corridor. And even in the 1950s, when the communist China was threatening to enter into eastern Tibet, some of the officers in the government, in the Ministry of External Affairs, suggested that let's take over the Chumbi Valley, and I think it will make the Chinese think twice before entering Chamdo or eastern Tibet. Of course,
Hmm.
this was outright rejected by the prime minister, who was very, very upset by that some officer could do that suggestion. But I think it was quite interesting idea that it would have removed that finger poking inside India. Of course, at that time, Sikkim is more or less independent till June of 1975. Sikkim was more or less independent state with treaty relation with India looking after the foreign affair. And also, India looked for years after the foreign affair of Bhutan. Now, of course, Bhutan has, since the 70s, has been admitted in the UN, and in Bhutan is looking after its own foreign affair. And I
Yeah.
think the whole issue that we are discussing today is that though Bhutan looks after its own foreign affair, it has been doing in the past in very close relation with the Ministry of External Affairs of India, and taking into account the strategic needs and the strategic worries that India could have, particularly in the Siliguri corridor. So that's the basis of that the dispute with China, and that change in the after the invasion of China, of Tibet by China, the change of the strategic setup in that area.
That's very interesting. So I wanted to ask you. You mentioned the Chinese weakness in the Chumbi corridor. Uh, is it what do you think is the perceived weakness that the Chinese have in this area, sir?
What is the
What is the weakness that the Chinese have in this area in the Chumbi corridor?
they obviously have a weakness because they are aware all finger pointings can also, in case of a conflict, in case of a war, that is certainly a great weakness. And yesterday only, I was just trying to write an article on the tank dens that they have dug tunnels. China has apparently dug tunnels in the Chumbi to hide their tanks. All the armored vehicles are hidden in tunnels in the Chumbi Valley, because they are very nervous of Chinese Indian counterattack by, for example, by the special force. So that is certainly all along the border, the what is today the China-India border, but which I always call it the Tibet-India's border. That is one of the weakest point of the Chinese, and they are very aware. Well, they are very well aware, and that's explained that they would be doing a lot of tunneling to hide their equipment, and particularly their armored vehicle. So that's interesting, and I think uh, that's a weakness of the Chinese.
Sir,
You have to remember also, I think I mentioned in another discussion with you, that in Chumbi Valley, in Yatong, which is the main city, the main town in that valley. There was between 100 and 150 Indian shops run by Maori people, dealing in everything under the earth. You could buy everything in these shops. They were getting the goods from Kalimpong or Darjeeling via Jalepla usually, or sometimes via Natula, and they were selling it in Tibet, and sometimes it was even going through the entire Tibet to the Chinese mainland. So that was a very great trade centers, and this was really the symbolic of the trade relation between Tibet and India. Today, of course, after 62, everything is closed. And India had a very beautiful bungalow, which was India's house. It has been destroyed a few years ago by the Chinese because they didn't want to remember that India had a very strong presence in the Chumbi Valley in Yatong. So that was more recently, China has announced that a train will come. The railway line will come also up to Yatong in the Chumbi Valley. Of course, it will be a strategic change, but because the road network is also good, so I don't know if it's worth the investment because they are in a dead end. No, at the end they don't trade with India. No, so
Hmm.
all this border is closed except for uh, in 2006 it was reopened for trade, but it's very minimal. And after COVID and after Doklam, it has never reopened. Now 6 years the trade has not reopened via Natula. So and it has always been minimal. It was not like in the old days with the Maori shops in Yatong. So today it's practically closed. When tourists go to Natula, they just saw a gate, a closed gate, and to bring a train the other side, it's a big investment. I don't know if it's worth for the Chinese, but maybe they have a lot of money. I'm not sure. But if they have too much money, they can try to invest in that. But it will not really change the strategic position of Yatong, which is very the most strategic that valley to bring the
Hmm.
troops reinforcement. But it's more for defending than in other area where, like in Arunachal or other in Ladakh, they can advance. But here, in already in 87, there was a 67, there was a small fight, and since then, the it has been really peaceful.
I'd like to mention this. You mentioned the India bungalow. I read your very insightful blog on this. Why was the India bungalow destroyed? And I'd encourage all the people that will be watching the show, please see Sir's blog and read that article and a lot many more which are there on Sir's blog. So I've actually read through that, and there's a beautiful photograph of that as well. So we'll have a look. Can I move to the next slide, sir?
Yes.
Sir.
Now, they are disputed areas in on the disputed by China, like everywhere else on the border, like China has done in India, whether it is in central sector, in Uttarakhand, in 5, 6 places, like Barauti, Chipkila, and others, like it is like in Arunachal Pradesh, in Samdorongchu, Kenzemane, Yangtze, Longju. China is trying to advance its own border. And whenever there's a void, they they try to grab this land. I mean, we have seen since May 2020 in Ladakh on the very large scale, whether it's in Galwan, on the finger area in Pangong, in Demchok, or in Depsang. Similarly, they are doing in Bhutan, but Bhutan is much weaker than India. India, when they started advancing in May of 2020 in eastern Ladakh, India put one more division in the 14th Corps, and now 60 or 70,000 Indian Javan are facing the China. China has always the advantage of the infrastructure because it's easier to build roads or railway lines or airstrip on the plateau. So similarly with Bhutan. So traditionally, there are a few places which are disputed. One, it is the tri-junction, which is just a red line, which show the clashes in June 2017, the Doklam incident. The other one is the Doklam Plateau, which is sandwiched between Ha district of Bhutan and the Chombi Valley. And two, three other places. You have different maps. I assembled this map very quickly in the morning, so they are better map than this one, but this one shows, given an idea of this, because there is some other area which are disputed. And a new dispute came a few years back, which it seems now that China is not claiming um, anymore. The Chaktang area, which is in the Tashiganses district of eastern Bhutan, which is adjacent to Tawang district of India. So there's a wildlife sanctuary, and China uh, told the UN body that this place belongs to China, but without any proof, just free claim without any proof. So that's what is claimed. So negotiations have been taking place since 1984 between the royal Bhutanese government and and China. Now, uh, recently, you mentioned in your introduction the declaration of the Prime Minister of Bhutan, but in Bhutan, it has always been, I mean, at least since 1984, K4, the fourth king. You have now K5 is the fifth king. K4 is known as K4, the fourth king, who has been dealing with the border. And it's him who keep all the files about the border. And of course, now from time to time, the government is informed, the prime minister or the Bhutanese parliament, but the main dealings are centered around the fourth king. And he has a great knowledge of the border. He has walked every inch of the border. So I would not take with a pinch of salt the declaration of the prime minister, but I think the Indian media got excited more than it was necessary, because ultimately it's K4 who deals with the border. It's not the prime minister. And he said something that we know in any case, that at the tri-junction, maybe you can show the next slide. Um, at the tri-junction in Doklam area, where the border is disputed, where China and India do not agree on the reach. Um, it is true that China, India, and Bhutan are involved. There have been negotiations. Actually, when the Doklam incident took place in June 2017, the only time the MEA published a statement, it stated that in 2012 there was discussion between India and China, and that it was agreed during this discussion that the status quo would be kept until the three parties agreed. So the prime minister has not said anything new, but
New.
this is valid only for the Dokala Gemochi. Now, there is a dispute. Where is the watershed? I will come to it later. There is that very large in the north area, Payul, um, Kempajong, that there was discussion during this 25th round. How was it possible to exchange for Bhutan against another area with China. And but unfortunately, about 2 3 years ago, China started building also villages and occupying
Yeah.
this forcefully. Um, you have to understand there's two type of areas. One is where the conflict took place in 2017, which India can intervene with the permission of Bhutan, because India and Bhutan have some agreement, and if requested by Bhutan, India can intervene, but India cannot intervene in northern
Northern
Bhutan.
Bhutan.
So the Chinese are aware of that, and they this Payul Pentajong, they just occupied it. I'm afraid maybe you go to the next slide. That map of was published by China in in the 1980s, and it shows all the area that China is claiming, and it gives some very vague historical explanation. I don't have the translation here, but for example, in the case of Chaktang that I mentioned, that apparently has been dropped now, but they say there's a monastery. Actually, it's a tiny monastery, very small monastery, and they said that monastery is affiliated to Tawang Monastery.
Hmm?
Uh, Tawang Monastery is claimed by China as because it was itself affiliated with Drepung Losoling Monastery in central Tibet near Lhasa, one of the largest monastery, three large monastery around Lhasa, Ganden, Sera, and Drepung. So hundreds of monasteries all over Tibet, as well as sometime in the Himalayan belt, are affiliated to this. So because the Chaktai monastery, that tiny thing, was affiliated to Tawang monastery, and Tawang monastery itself affiliated to Drepung, China has claimed it. And the other reason that they gave here in the Chinese, they say that the yaks were permitted to from some area in Tawang, some villages in Tawang, what is Tawang district today, that Tawang Frontier Division, were permitted to come and graze their yak in that area. Therefore, it belongs to. So it's very tenuous. Always their claim are historically not founded on very strong basis, but they don't care. China doesn't care because China has the muscle. In any case, in that particular case, it has been dropped. In the case of Payul in the north, their own map of 1980s shows that area as part of Bhutan. But
Bhutan.
recently, they have so there was a very good series of articles by that very great Tibetan scholar, Professor Robbie Barnett, in Foreign Policy magazine. He showed in detail the maps, and how in their own map they were showing that same part of China of Bhutan in the 1980s, and suddenly they changed their own map and show it as a part of Tibet, therefore of China. So next slide, maybe.
May I just ask you something, sir? Can I just
Yes,
go back
yes.
to the previous one? This Sakting, what they claim in the eastern Bhutan, considering that they don't have control over Tawang at the moment, and this is from the Chinese perspective, I'm asking a question. How do you think they even plan to control this area? Or is this just a bargaining chip that they have suddenly started doing so that
It's just to put pressure on Bhutan, because they have no way. They know very well that Tawang Monastery will never become Chinese.
yeah,
Indian army is ready in the area. You have two divisions in that area, including Yangtze, where the incident took place in December 2022. The border in Kanzimane area is also very well defended. There's no way that China could enter even 1 kilometer in India's territory. This is my belief. I visited these places many times. I believe that our core is ready to anything, and it has shown in December 2022 when the 300 Chinese tried to enter in Yangtze area, which is east of Bumla. Uh, they were pushed back during the night itself, and they had a lot of casualty. Of course, they will never tell you the number of their casualty. I don't think anybody died like in Gavan,
Yeah,
but
but there were
some people
injuries.
were very badly wounded. So, I would not say that they got a bloody nose, but uh, they were pushed back on the other side of the watershed. So they are aware now that it's not that easy. So forget about Shaktang. Shaktang is too far. They will never reach Shaktang. I think that's one of the reasons. I will come at the end, my last slide, that they seems to have dropped Shaktang.
I mean, it's
Uh,
really funny when you see something like this. You're like, this thing is nowhere connected to China even. Why even asking for it? It's quite a interesting.
It's not funny, but it's China way of dealing,
Hmm,
because it's not funny that India has 60 or 70,000
yeah.
troops in eastern Ladakh, but China has that tendency to enlarge its territory. And somehow the visit of the defense minister of China for the CSO meeting and his encounter with the Indian RM, Rajnath Singh, shows that somehow they would like to come out of it, no? But when they did what they did in May 2020, they didn't realize, I think, that India would really stand and don't move and don't accept any nonsense, and that India would ask. Now it's 3 years ago. India would ask that all the place where China has entered, or the place that where China does not allow the patrolling, like in Depsang, should come back to the statu quo before May 1920. I don't think they were expecting this type of reaction. Now with Bhutan, northern Bhutan, the northern neighbor is very scary for them, because there is no way that in place like Payul, they can troops can be sent, and the Bhutanese Royal Army, good army, often trained by India, but they have no way to defend themselves against the bully, the northern
Hmm.
bully, not northern neighbor, the northern bully.
Northern bully. In Hindi, there's a term called gunda, which is like
Mm.
a street thug. That's what the Chinese have come
I
down to
think you
be like.
went back. You have to go the other side.
Yeah,
You went. You see, okay, now you see that map, the where the incident and the face-off took place in June, July, August 1917. Now the question is, where is the watershed? In 1890, there was a treaty between the Manchu Empire and the British in India, and they agreed to demarcate Sikkim's border. The only issue for the British India was the northern border of Sikkim. Where was the So for that they used the watershed principle. But in the 1890 treaty, they mention the northern part of Sikkim, and they say the border is in one place called Gimochi. Gimochi is
hmm,
a sort of a peak. Now, I think nobody had gone to Demochi. Nobody knew where that. I mean, they knew, the cartographer, the Survey of India knew vaguely, but nobody had surveyed that area. Nobody had walked to that area. So much so that Sir Claude White, who was a political officer in Sikkim, he ordered to put some pillars in northern Sikkim. The Tibetan didn't agree, because that treaty was what China calls an unequal treaty. the main stakeholder, which was Sikkim, independent state at that time, Bhutan, which was also getting independent, who had its own king and own administration, as well as Tibet, who was fully independent. And young husband discovered in 1904, means 14 years later, they were not involved in the treaty. So the British were colonial masters to sign treaty with people who are not at all involved. The Manchu, no Chinese, no man ever come in this area. Uh, it was rather easy for the northern Sikkim where the watershed was used, and the watershed is quite clear. And there's very hardly any incident except in places like Nakula, which is, the pass is maybe a few kilometers long, so you're not very clear where the exact border. Now, Gimochi, nobody had knew where it was, so they put a pillar, a stone pillar in Dokala. The next morning, the Tibetan destroyed it because they said, "We have not been involved in this treaty. We don't recognize this treaty. Who are you to sign on our behalf?" And the Tibetans coming from Chumbi Valley. Now this remained like that, and it was not an issue. But when China started entering into Tibet in the 50, 51, but start occupying the Chumbi Valley, Yatong in the mid 50s, the government of Bhutan and the government of India thought it should be demarcated. We should know exactly where is the tri-junction between Chumbi Valley, India, and Bhutan. So one officer called T.S. Murthy, who has been posted in Tawang when the Dalai Lama came in 1959, and one who was one of the most knowledgeable, or I should say the most knowledgeable officer, Indian officer about the border, uh, whether in Nifa or in Sikkim, walked there with a major from the Survey of India, and he worked with the Bhutanese authority and the local grazers, the local villages, and they found that the Batangla was the main watershed and should be the tri-junction. So it was decided by government of India and Bhutanese that Batangla was not was us. And Kemochi was few kilometers south, was not the because there was no watershed from there. So it was entered on the survey of India map, but uh, China, who had by that time was already in Chumbi Valley, was not informed about it. No? So that's why they started contesting and claiming. The other part that I want, the orange part, the Doklam Plateau, is also very interesting because that area has never been demarcated. So Bhutanese have a claim, China has another claim. But what is interesting, because at the beginning I mentioned the two corridors, is that the main artery, the main road between Yatong and Paris, going toward Gyanse and Lhasa, is very, very, very close to that orange part. It's less than 1 kilometer maybe from the. I, at that time, I would have prepared other maps also. Yeah, I should do it one day. That map showing how close. So for China, it's not acceptable. So they will have a tendency always to encroach in that Doklam Plateau and go towards Ha district of Bhutan. But here again, what can India do? India cannot intervene militarily to stop it. India can always advise or tell the Bhutanese, we are worried for you, and we are worried for our own, we have our own concern that the encroachment will go on. Maybe next map.
May I just ask you a question, sir? You mentioned
Oh,
this road, and this road is, I mean, I'm sure all the audience can also just see this here. People will be viewing the program. This road goes from Yangdong going northwards, right? There's this yellow line which is going through the Doklam
Yeah,
Plateau marked
I
in
don't
orange.
I don't call it Yadong. The Chinese, you see, Chinese have changed all the names.
Names.
Like Metok, which is north of Persiang, they call Medok,
Medok.
Memutao, Yadong. So now everyone in India is speaking Yadong. Yadong doesn't exist, it's Yatong. Yatong has
Yatong.
been, you have to, and I think the way to counter China on their renaming places in Arunachal Pradesh is to use the original transcript of the Tibetan names. These places are Tibetans. Uh, China may not be able to pronounce this name properly, but they remain Tibetan places, so we should use the transcript.
Yatong.
So I have been using. I have a very good dictionary showing the Chinese, the Pinyin, the Tibetan, and the Tibetan transcript and English. So I think should India should start using only like Chikaste for Chigatse. Maybe for the Chinese to pronounce certain names is very difficult. Nari. In the Western Tibet, they say Ali. So we should not say Yatong. I'm just sorry to
No, no,
interrupt you.
no,
So
absolutely, sir. It's a
that road, yeah,
it's a
that road.
lesson for all of us,
Now,
as a matter of fact. And to your point, it's not Doklam, right?
yeah, they've changed. And
It's
anyway,
Dokala.
that road goes to Paris, which it passed near the Chomolari mountain,
Huh.
and very close by, and goes to Paris, and further goes to Gyantse and Lhasa. So that is a very important artery for the reinforcement, and so even without train, they can bring any reinforcement in no time in this area.
And the second question is, sir, the the Doklam Plateau is marked further north in orange in the map. The standoff is way further south.
No, that
Why
is
is it called the
confusion.
Why is it called the Doklam standoff? There's nothing to do with
I
Doklam in
think we
that
have
case.
stopped calling Doklam, but it should have not been called Doklam because Doklam is a plateau, and that tri-junction, Dokala, Batangla, and Gimochi, they are the Batangla is the tri-junction. So it should, but sometime the during the conflict, is everyone start calling Doklam. So if you change the name, people are confused and don't know. But that's part of the information warfare also that China
Warfare.
to change the name of the places. They have done it very early of after the occupation of Tibet. Like in the case of the central sector, there is one Barauti, which has seen many Chinese incursion over the years. Barauti they call Vuche, and I've seen files in of the Ministry of External Affairs in the National Archives. They they were scratching their head. Where is that Wuche? Wuche is no on. Nobody is not a Wuche. It's not a Tibetan name. It's a new Chinese name, but uh, why to call Barauti?
It is Baravati.
It's a small plain, and Tonjomla is a pass in the north. So a very tiny place. But why to change the name Wuje? So the officers, they didn't know what is this Wuje about. So it created confusion for several years. Like that's why also I think they are trying to keep changing the name of few places in Arunachal.
Indeed, this is an eye opener. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of people in India would really be find it interesting to know about this, sir. Can I move forward, sir?
Yes. You see, it's linked these two areas. You have the entire Chinese claim here that Gemochen, Kibuchi, Gemochen. So there is an argument that it's not the same place, and uh, in 1890 it was not shown on the map. So but there is a peak. The highest peak was there, but it's not the tri-junction. So maybe next. So I think next. It's very important to differentiate the area which are direct concern for India, where India can intervene with the permission of the government of Bhutan. In June, on 17 June 2017, 16 June, when the Chinese start building the road, the permission of the forking was sought by General Rawat, was chief of army staff at that time. He flew to Bhutan and he asked the green light, the permission for the Indian army to intervene. So permission was given. But unless permission is given by the Bhutanese government, which is always under tremendous pressure, India cannot intervene because it is a foreign country. There is an agreement that India could eventually help Bhutan or support Bhutan or intervene, but it is with the permission of the Royal Bhutanese government and the fourth king. So that is the area of the Doklam Plateau, and I will show the next slide that till now it was not occupied. It was not. Some people say that I've never been able to verify this in the files, in the historic files, that in 1910 the 13th Dalai Lama took refuge in Kalimpong and he stayed for 2 years in Kalimpong because the Chinese warlord of Sichuan had entered into Lhasa and forced him to take refuge in India. So he stayed 2 years in Kalimpong, except for some few weeks he went to Kolkata to meet the viceroy. Now, when he was in Kalimpong, he was staying with the Dorje family, which is historically the prime minister of Bhutan. And I was told that because to thank the Dorje family, Dalai Lama would have given some grazing rights or some pasture in that area. So this is not confirmed, but the fact is it was not demarcated, and very often the grazers from Tibet as well as the grazer from Bhutan were using this area. Now China, as in other places, have changed the statu quo in building this so-called Xiaokang village. What is Xiaokang village? Is this village which are well moderately well-off villages. China has built up more than 600 of these villages along the border. It means for India that the demography of the border is totally changed because, like in this that particular village in Doklam Plateau, all along the border, north of Tawang, north of Upper Subansari, north of Upper Siang, even in north of the Loit Valley, in eastern Arunachal, everywhere villages have been built. Many places there was nobody before. Out of nowhere, China will build a village and bring people. They will bring a certain percentage of local people in the surrounding areas, but they will also bring people from elsewhere in Tibet, from the northern Tibet, from Nakshu prefecture in particular. They are bringing, it's according to their own article, their own media, they said 1.3 lakhs of people were resettled, reallocated, because they say Nakshu area is too high and the Tibetan can't breathe because there's no oxygen, which is nonsense because the Tibetans have lived very well for centuries and centuries in their own countries. They are genetically adapted to this. So there's no issue, but they're using that excuse to resettle people on the border of India. And the third part of the new inhabitants of these villages are Han, Chinese Han, that they will try to marry to local Tibetans. So it's a total change of. So they have done it in Bhutan also. They have done it in that area, that Payol that I've shown, that was earlier on the in Bhutan in Chinese map in the 80s. Now they have occupied. There have been several villages, 5 or 6 villages. It was documented by Professor Robbie Barnett I mentioned earlier, and they have done it also in that Doklam Plateau. Now look at this picture. Is it a village? I don't think so. This is from a Chinese website. I'm not. I'm not. It's barracks. It's a garrison,
It's a
and
garrison, yes.
half of the villages, though a lot of publicity has been made in China in the Chinese media about poverty alleviation, and we have changed these very um, poor areas and we are making them rich. First of all, we don't know how can from nothing you can suddenly reach, because you have to have a revenue. They can subsidize for 5 years, 10 years. They can pay fully for the village, but after 5 or 10 years, these people have no occupation, no agriculture, because very often it's in the middle of the river or in the middle, very narrow valleys. So, in my views, is sustained by using it for the PLA, for the People's Liberation Army, and this is very clearly this in Doklam, this village, which it came to light 2 3 weeks ago. That is very clearly garrison. It's not a
Absolutely.
Chokong village, though they call it Chokong village. So maybe next, or if you have
It's
any question.
no, it's interesting they call this a village without a cow shed or a field or a nothing.
No, many of these village, like the first village was built in Yume, north of Takshin, north of Ubasomansari, uh, in 2017, and it was adopted by the Emperor of China, Xi Jinping himself. So he wrote a letter to the 2 ladies living in that village. There were 7 people living in that village for years, and now there is hundreds of people with school, garrison, police station, immigration, whatever you can think of, and of course they have a very good communication links. They have a Wi-Fi. They have everything. Of course, they have cameras also, surveillance camera on each and every house, and they know what people do. That is another issue. But these villages, they have done a lot of publicity. They have hundreds of articles and films on Yume, but this is out of nowhere. These villages. So these villages is a threat for India because it changed the demography of the border, and they say these people are the defender of the borders. They are not the defender on the borders, because when the Yangtze incident took place in December 2022, India had noticed. Though now China, sorry, America is taking the credit for it. America said they provided all the intelligence. Okay, they can say whatever they want, but India has its own way. India has also satellite, and India also is able to monitor what's happening the other side. And India knew that new road had been built in north of Yangtze, and they have done a new village which was entirely a garrison. Now, China was very upset with India, because India has opened these holy waterfalls, which were blessed by Guru Padma Sambhav in the 8th century. They've opened for tourists to visit, and the fact that India allows visitors so close to the LAC really upset. So that's why they try to take revenge and enter in December 2022. So the point is that these villages are not what China says, just well-off, or moderately well-off villages to relocate poor Tibetans and to make them rich. That is not. Next slide, maybe. Any question?
No, not at all, sir. Emperor of
So
China is quite at its game, sir.
that map is from the Royal Survey of Bhutan.
Yes, sir.
Now, that is the area which is east of the tri-junction that we mentioned, which saw the clash in 2017. And a lot of articles have been written about the villages on the Amochu. Amochu goes
The
to
Red
later
Cross.
on to India, to Peninsular area, maybe 30 or 40 kilometers south of this area. But as you see on this map, the Red Cross is the first Xiaogang village built by China in the middle of the river. So very clearly, it is south of the Royal Bhutanese Survey's map. But Bhutan government decided, the ambassador in Delhi, they said no, it was a disputed area, and it was part of the Chumi Valley and the Yatong district, so Yatong County, sorry. So Bhutan had to change his stance because that map is from 2006 or 2007, has to change his stance because the Chinese has put Bhutan in front of a fait accompli by building that village. And again, it's very difficult for India to intervene in this area
Hmm.
because it's much too far from the bases of the Indian troops, and it would need really strong clearance from the four king. I think the Bhutanese since '84 have been keen to settle the border and to find a solution for all this area that I mentioned earlier. But normally in negotiation you have give and take. You were mentioning for Shatang the bargaining chip. Okay, I claim this, and after I give it to you, and you agree on something else. But with the northern bully, it's much more difficult for
Yeah,
Bhutan because it's not give and take; it's take and take very often, and it's not working with India because India has the power to defend its own border as the army, but for Bhutan, it's much, much more difficult. So you have
difficult.
to keep this in mind. That's why I think the fourth king was keen to settle the border to find a solution, and that's why it was rumored that maybe an agreement has been signed. The fifth king, his son, the present king, actually, because the fourth king resigned and gave the power to his son. He came to Delhi, he met the prime minister, he met the RM, he met Dr. Jaishankar, and he had discussion. We don't know about the content of the discussion, but it was certainly linked with a rumored agreement or an agreement which could come any day with China. Of course, for Bhutan, it would be good to have a signed agreement and to have but again, I'm saying that it may not be give and take. It may be take and take, or maybe they'll get little small percentage of. They will give a lot and they get back not so much
Get
because
very little.
next slide maybe. So you see that village in Pongda on the Amochu. That is 3-4 kilometers inside. I believe 2-3 more villages. That satellite picture from this Moxar technology very clear. Uh, of course, they don't show. It doesn't look as a garrison because they know that all the satellites are on it, so it will show like residents, but we are not too sure who is living in this residence. And again, the issue is there was nobody there. That Amochu River, they built in the middle of the river that village, It's not actually. It's quite dangerous to build such a village if some floods take place and like that. But it's another issue. It's their problem. But there was nobody there. So it means all these people have come from where? They are most probably from Yatong County or elsewhere in Tibet, as well as from mainland China. So that was in March 2022. I think now there's two more villages. The Amochu, as I mentioned, flows to Prinsoling, 40 kilometers down south. So for India also, it's an issue that they will, because there's a road apart from the village. There's a road going 8-9 kilometers south of that village, that first village.
Okay.
You're aware that recently that China has renamed 11 places. So I've put on the map these places. Interesting part for us, because we are talking about Bhutan, we are not talking about Tawang district or the other district of Arunachal. That Chaktang has been shown. That was the official map on which I put the name in the English transcription of the renamed place. Chaktang is shown as part of Bhutan. So does it mean that temporarily they have dropped this? Probably, because otherwise that is an official map. If the map of the changed name. So as you see on that map, the the county of all the Arunachal Pradesh is shown as part of some of the prefecture in Tibet, in Shannan Loka prefecture, as well as Ningchi prefecture. So the entire administration comes of this part, which are 100% part of the Indian territory, and which are occupied by, I mean, it's Arunachal Pradesh. They are shown as administered by Shannan prefecture and Ningchi prefecture. So the yellow is Shannan, and the bluish one is Ningchi. So they show all this part of Arunachal as part of Tibet, and administered by Tibet, but that is again it's a nonsense. But interestingly, that Chaktang has not been claimed on that map, which is 1 month old. Now I could say one word about these 11 places, though it's not directly Bhutan. But one place is very important, is Pangchen, which is it's
Center left.
now it's known in Zimintang. It's where the first clashes in 1962, in October 62, took place. It's where the 7th Brigade of Brigadier John Dalby and the 4th Division of General Niranjan Prasad was located. Actually, it was the operational headquarters of the 4th Division. So at that time, it's called Pangchen or Zimintang. I think the name changed at the time of the war. But this Pangchen village, it was a group of villages historically, and Zimintang first was a tiny, one of the smaller village, and later it became the circle. So now it's called as Zimintang Circle of Tawang district. So this was a very important village, because to determine where the border was, because there's all the grazing rights of these villages were going to the Tagla Ridge. So that's one of the reasons why India decided for the Tagla Ridge as a border. The other reason was, of course, the watershed. But historically, this Pangchem group of village was very important because they were very clearly part of Monyul. Monyul is Tawang district. It's a Tibetan or the Monpa name for the Tawang district. It was very clearly part of uh, India's territory. And if you go 7, 8, 10 kilometers north, you're in Tibet and you're part of Tsona, a group of villages and Tsona administration. So that is again putting pressure on India and indirectly on Bhutan because China has been building a lot of infrastructure, including Xiaogang village north of the Bhutanese border in that area, in Tsona County. So that's also important. So you see the way they deal, they put on their administrative map and claim with it. And again, they have no reason to claim, no historical background to claim
Mm.
this. And when the issue of the border was discussed by the official in 1960 for several months and maps and all historical documentary changed, China had very little to show. And India had all the documents, everything, including the land revenue and the grazing rights, and apart from the watershed. But China doesn't really care about all these niceties. They just take what they want they need. And when the neighbor is weak, like it is a case of Bhutan, uh, it's easier. It's
Mm.
not that Bhutan doesn't understand in India's concerns, strategic concern, and you, as you're aware, maybe that the fifth king, the present king, who came to Delhi last month, uh, um, he was trained in National
Defense
Defense
Academy.
College in DC for 11 months. He was a trainee. Uh, every year, every batch has a Bhutanese officer who are trained by the government of India. So it's on at the level of brigadiers usually. So the king attended for 11 months the course, so he knows very well. But sometimes their position is not very easy. Uh, their another bully is putting more pressure and trying to invest more in Bhutan. Everything went cooled down because of the COVID. So all the Chinese tourists couldn't travel, and it has put some brake on the investment or the pressure on Bhutan. But it now is going to pick up again, and first on with the border.
So, but uh, so your camera went off.
Oh,
Yeah. So, but why has he kind of? It's perfectly. It's on. Why has he removed this Sakteng from his claim? Is this part of the deal between Bhutan and China?
no, I don't think it's a claim. I think it was too weak, their arguments, historical arguments. Uh, if I would have shown a photo of the Chakteng Gompa, the monastery, it's very tiny. It's 1 or 2 rooms only. So it's not. I think their argument was too not strong enough to withstand a lot of public scrutiny. Or so they are also where they don't want to make too much a fool of themselves for something they don't really need, and something that, as we discussed, they cannot really take. So, and they prefer to have to be so-called friendly with Bhutan in dropping Chaksan and taking other places, and because other places India can't say anything, no, the Payul in the north, no? But Shaktang India has something to say, no? Your mic is going on.
This was an eye opener, sir. Let me assure you that I mean,
I don't know.
I've done a little bit of study in this area, but the kind of stuff that you've shown us today is something that I don't think a lot of us would know about, and especially the Doklam and the Dolam area that you've actually explained to us, and with the details that you've explained to us is really, really amazing. Bhutan, of course. My only one question to you, sir, about this thing, last question, would be that with the Chinese trying to build a diplomatic relation with Bhutan, are they trying to make this issue bilateral rather than trilateral? Because the Prime Minister's statement, although very badly misinterpreted within India by the media and many other people, he said it very clearly that this is a trilateral issue, it's not a bilateral issue. That
Only
somewhere down,
the junction, the
yeah,
Batanga,
that area.
Dokala, Gibochi is a trilateral issue, and the fact that it was discussed in 2012 and it was decided between India and China that status quo was not be changed. It was very interesting that the fact that during the clash in 2017, uh, India, the ministry, only issued one statement and very clear, very short, saying that in 2012 we have discussed the issue. We have decided that unless we find an agreement between the three parties, the status quo will not be changed. By making a road, by bringing the bulldozer in 16 June 2017, China unilaterally changed that agreement. That's what India objected. That's why the army chief flew to Paro, met the king, and got his green light to do something about it. So, but other places it's very difficult. There's no such a thing that other
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
is between Bhutan and the northern
In China.
neighbor, northern neighbor.
Northern bully.
No, no,
Northern bully.
bullies from me, but the Bhutanese call it northern neighbor.
No, I'm gonna
It's a
steal
bully
that.
neighbor. Mm.
I'm gonna take that word from you and call it the Northern Bully from now on. So it's really interesting how the Chinese have tried to spin this entire
But they,
thing, and now,
they tried to bully India in Eastern Ladakh.
yeah,
It didn't work. So now they have to think. That's why when the Chinese defense minister came a few days back, he said, Let's we can discuss other issue and we forget about the border." But RM was very clear. You back first. Let's come back to the status quo. After we can discuss anything.
after that we can keep going. We're a older
Anyway,
old
it keeps
country.
going. The trade is keep going.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in favor of China, too much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. This was wonderful, and I'm always grateful that you've taken out the time and the study that you've told us. It's a really, really interesting, and I hope all the viewers that watch this really have a great learning experience. Till next time, sir, for another insightful deep dive. Thank you so much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you.